Hi there, my name is Claire and I'm the writing and grammar tutor here at Grand Prairie Regional College, and today I just wanted to talk a bit about the major differences between college writing and high school writing. So we're going to go over some of the key differences, but in addition to that, we're also going to talk about some of the shifts in expectations that happen, some of the main types of writing that you may be expected to do in your college classes, as well as some tools and tips to help you get started with your college writing. So we can break this down into several different key areas that we're going to go over. First, we'll talk about some different writing prompts and aims based on some of the assignments that I've seen at GPRC over the years. We're also going to talk about some of the differences in expectations that your instructors may have or that they'll be looking for in your writing. We're also going to talk a bit about the importance of critical thinking and the way that you explore your ideas in a bit more depth, just because the way that you do that for college writing tends to be a bit different than you would have for high school writing. We're going to go into some of the different ways that you'll be expected to support your ideas in your writing. We'll talk a little bit about the differences in thesis statements, just because that's such a core component of most types of writing, and the way that they're structured and the priorities they have also tend to be fairly different between college and high school writing. And at the end, we're going to go over some of those tools and tips to get you started and to get prepared to go into college writing. All of those tools and tips, where they are online, those links will be posted somewhere around this video so that you can access them more easily. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about some of the different prompts and aims that you may see. These are based on actual assignments that I've seen at GPRC. Every so often, an instructor will give you a totally free-form prompt. So in this case, you can basically write your paper, whether it's a research paper or a more persuasive paper, on any topic you want. I have seen this more in some of the English classes, sometimes in business communications classes. I've seen research papers like this. Usually, if an instructor has given you totally free choice on the topic you choose, that means that they're going to be looking to see how your formatting is, how you can structure your ideas, how clearly you can express yourself. So the content will still be important, of course, but this is more sometimes to gauge the level that your writing is at, or to show that you can put some standard writing things into practice based on what you've been learning in class, if you've been learning certain writing techniques or layouts, formats, things like that. One thing I typically recommend if you get this free reign over the topic that you use is to either choose something that you really care about, that you want to talk about, choose something that you want to learn more about, especially if there's something that maybe got brought up in one of your classes very briefly, but it really interested you and you think it may be useful to learn more about that thing. Use free prompts like this as an opportunity to explore those things a little bit more, and that way you're reinforcing your knowledge at the same time as doing your assignments. So, yeah. Another thing that you may encounter are some more specific prompts. For example, in fields like in the nursing department and things like that, they'll usually want you to target some key area of the content that you've been learning in that course when you're writing your paper. So for example, something like discuss the importance of cultural sensitivity in the field of nursing. So, if you've been learning about those key concepts, sometimes it might not be that one specific concept. It could be a whole bunch of different ones. It could be choose one of the concepts that we've studied and discuss how it applies to the field, in which case it's kind of a mix of the free-form prompt and the specific one. In these cases, though, in addition to the way that you organize your information and express yourself, the content is also going to be a bit more key, because the instructor will want to see that you're able to understand and discuss what's being taught in your course with, a pretty good level of understanding and sophistication as well. Okay. The last type of prompt that I've seen fairly frequently are more detailed ones. These are most common, I would say, in English courses. Maybe every so often you might see something similar in, say, a sociology class, in more of the humanities classes. That's where you tend to get these prompts that are quite a bit longer, where the instructor explains a lot more, gives you a lot of details to work with. For example, in a prompt like this one, where it's saying, in the novel we've read, many of the characters face the prospect of their worlds changing overnight. What does the author tell us about this? Does it present a hopeful message or a cynical message about this? What are they saying about this? How does this one aspect? And it sort of goes on through several different questions. If you see a prompt like that, typically that means that the first part or two parts are the main idea that your instructor wants you to be addressing with your paper. The following questions, like the smaller, more detailed ones, those tend to be more hints of possible directions that you can take it in, rather than saying you have to answer all 4 of these questions in exactly this order and that's what your paragraph should be. It's very rarely a situation like that. If it is a case of your instructor wanting you to answer all of these specific things in this order, usually it will be presented more in, say, a bullet point format, or it will say more explicitly, discuss these different aspects of it, and your instructor will probably outline that a bit more clearly. If you are ever unsure whether you're supposed to answer all the questions or if those parts of the prompts are just potential directions you can take it in, I would definitely recommend asking your instructor, just so that you're very, very clear on the guidelines before you get partway into writing an assignment only to realize that it wasn't what the instructor was asking for. Another type of detailed prompt, this one is based on prompts that I've seen from the philosophy courses here. Maybe something like define and explain the author's central argument, and then indicate 3 problems with the author's logic or reasoning, that is. I've seen that also presented as, say, logical fallacies. If that's something you're learning about in the class, this can often be a way that the instructor sets it up so that you have a chance to practice and explore those different types of concepts that you've been learning about. But yeah, again, with this one, it's already sort of suggesting a very specific way that you approach it. It's like, just take that argument and indicate those 3 problems with it. So with these detailed prompts, one key thing to keep in mind is staying on topic and staying focused on that topic throughout the paper to make sure that you're really answering that question or those questions that have been asked of you. Okay. Another thing that can change a lot between high school writing and college writing are the expectations of you and your work as a student. When I've spoken with high school students from around here before, or those who have recently started college right out of high school, many of them have expressed to me that their instructors have said things like, work just gets a lot harder in college, or when you first start, it's normal for your grades to drop even a full letter, and that's just something that happens to a lot of people. And I think that they are pointing out something that can exist for people, which is that there can be this gap between the expectations of high school writing and the expectations of college writing. The unfortunate thing about that gap is that usually by the time you're in a college setting, it becomes largely up to you to close that gap if you begin to notice that there is one. So some examples of places where this gap could show up, or where these expectations tend to be different in college writing, are in the writing itself. So with things like language use, just your general command of written English, the accuracy with which you can express your thoughts, so how clearly you can get your ideas across, and how the words that you choose reflect the ideas you're trying to get across. The depth in which you write, so your ability to express more complex ideas, more nuanced ideas, more sophisticated ideas. Originality is also usually a priority, even if you're writing about a topic that a lot of people have talked about before, one that's a really popular topic for conversation. Instructors will still be wanting to see that you can put some of your own ideas or support some of your own ideas in the papers that you write, and that it doesn't just sound like a bunch of other papers that you could read on the subject. Apart from in the writing itself, there are also some different expectations just for you as a student. One of them being that you will be fairly autonomous and kind of take control of your learning and really work on your own to make sure that you are meeting criteria and doing the things that you need to do. Instructors at the college tend to be very supportive. They're happy to help students. They want to, see you succeed and support you how they can. But there are time constraints on that, especially nowadays when most of us are doing our learning remotely. It can be more difficult to give as much feedback as one would like. So that ability to really take charge of your own learning and really make sure that you're doing what you need to do becomes very important. There isn't as much hand-holding in a college environment. Well, of course, everybody's high school experience is different, but there isn't as much time for one-on-one support a lot of the time in the college environment as there is in the high school environment. One other thing that instructors will be looking to see is that you can show a willingness to learn and improve. One of the best ways that I would suggest to show them that is whenever you get feedback on a written assignment, is to be sure to hold on to that feedback, and then when you work on future assignments for that class, refer back to the notes that they gave you, and that way you can make sure that you're avoiding some of the things that they may have critiqued the first time. I'd suggest doing that maybe at a later stage of the writing. Once you've got maybe a first or second draft all done, then you can go through and say, okay, did I make any of the same mistakes I made last time? If so, how can I fix those? Because if you show that you're receptive to that feedback and taking it into consideration when you work on future assignments, that's going to go a long way, not just for your grades, but also for the quality of writing that you're able to produce. And the last thing I would say instructors expect is just that you're going to put in the time and effort that you need to be producing your best work consistently. I've seen instructors not bat an eye at the fact that it takes a lot of hours to complete certain things. Some of the assignments you may get might be long or difficult or, out of your comfort zone or what you're used to working on in an academic environment. But usually, as with the gap, it's up to you to make sure that you're prepared and that you know how to meet those standards and be performing at your best. If you do find that you need more support with writing, you can always seek out your instructors during their office hours. They will usually list these on the syllabus somewhere. Especially nowadays, some instructors may prefer to communicate by email if you have certain questions. I would suggest making sure you have all of those links accessible and somewhere nearby where you know where they are, so that if you do have any questions for your instructors, you know when and how to contact them most easily. You can also form study groups with your classmates. This can be a really good way to reinforce what you're learning in class and just clarify small things with each other, make sure that you're on the same page with what needs to be done. This can be a really good support system as you go through college, and it can also be a good way to make sure that you're all sort of getting the same message about what it is that you need to be working on. And these are things that also can be done virtually as well. You can connect with your classmates and get their phone numbers, emails. You can set up regular Zoom study groups as well. So it's still something that can be done virtually if you need to. Other options include booking appointments with us at the Academic Success Center. Currently, I'm the only writing and grammar tutor, but there are also, if you find that you are struggling during, say, the research process and looking for sources, you can also book research appointments with our librarians. And I'll leave some links somewhere that will direct you towards where you can book those appointments. And we also at the Academic Success Center tend to do a series of workshops throughout every semester. These can also be found on our website, and a fair amount of them tend to be writing related. If you ever see any of those topics but are unable to make it to the workshop, but you'd still be interested to learn about it, then just contact us, and I'm sure we'd be happy to discuss the content of the workshop in a one-on-one appointment with you when it's convenient for you. Okay, but going into some more of what the actual writing you'll be expected to produce will be like, I would say one of the very key things is that you'll be moving away from the book report formula. So in high school writing, a lot of the writing that you will do will be to verify that you have understood the course material. So it's a lot of explaining, it's a lot of, basically saying the facts about something or the details about something back to your instructor. But with college writing, it's different. So your instructors will not just be looking to check that you've done the class readings. They'll be expecting you to dig deeper into what you're reading, think critically about it, and draw your own conclusions about it that you can then go on to support with evidence. So some questions that you can keep in mind when you're reading something, just to make sure you're doing that critical thinking, is to always be thinking about it as a written document. So what I mean by that is, whether you're reading a book or even watching a movie, somebody or a team of people created that thing for a certain purpose. They had a certain story they wanted to tell. They had a certain message they wanted to get across. So you want to be asking yourself, what is the purpose of this text or this source? Why was it written? Why did somebody put it out here in the first place? In terms of the person who made it, why are they expressing themselves in this way? Why did they choose these methods to get those ideas out there? What are the connections between what this person has created and the world that surrounds or surrounded them when they made it? These are the sorts of questions that can allow you to start getting some ideas on what the author's message is and developing some of your own thoughts that you can then say about the text in your own writing. So with regard to backing up your own ideas, there are two components to this. The first component is developing that idea of your own, and the second component is using sources that already exist as evidence to back up your idea. So when you have your own idea for a paper, that will usually take the form of a thesis statement. This is similar to high school writing in many ways. There are some differences between college thesis statements and high school thesis statements that I'm going to get into later, but typically a thesis statement is still the last sentence of your introduction paragraph, and it will express the main idea that you want to get across in your paper, as well as some hint of the way that you're going to explore that argument later on in the paper. One important thing to note about thesis statements is that you want it to have enough content to really be discussed that needs sources to back it up, something that could be debated, where not everyone's opinion about that thing may be the same, or where people might not have done enough research to have that opinion on that topic. So for example, a sentence like, yoga has been practiced for centuries and many people enjoy it. This is more of a descriptive sentence. It's something that wouldn't take very long to discuss or to prove once you had sources that back up that idea. So this doesn't really work for a thesis statement. It could work very well as a sentence earlier in your introduction paragraph where you're setting up some background and context to your topic. But for a thesis statement, you want something that has a bit more force of an idea behind it. So for example, something like practicing yoga is beneficial and crucial to improving mental, physical, and emotional health. Here, we've got the same topic, but now we're expressing a specific idea about it, saying this is something that is beneficial for people, really important for people. And when we lay out that mental, physical, and emotional health, it gives an idea of the different aspects of health that you're going to discuss throughout the paper to back up that overall point. Okay. Once you have that thesis statement in place, which is, I would say, a pretty early step in starting to organize your entire paper, you're going to also need some sources to back that up. And this is really what the middle of a paper, those body paragraphs, is going to mostly be about. It's going to be about bringing in that evidence to back up your main idea or one aspect of that main idea. So the different types of sources you may be expected to use are texts that you've read in class. This could be anything from a novel in your English class to a textbook that you've been provided. You may also be including articles and research that you have to go and find on your own. More often than not, I would say it's a mix of the two in most courses. Especially in things like nursing, fields like that. Even in PEAK, you may have a mix of information from your textbook and information from articles that you find online. I'd say it's very rare to only have one source for an assignment, but in English classes, especially earlier on in English classes, if you're reading novels and things like that, you may only be using the novel as your only source text, and in that case, all of the evidence that you're going to be bringing into your paper is going to be likely direct quotes from the novel. Okay. For most assignments that you do in college, if not all of them, formal citations will also be required. The most common citation style used at GPRC is APA formatting and citation style. MLA is also used mostly in English classes, sometimes in other humanities courses. Chicago is fairly rarely used, but if you're taking any courses in music or history, you may be required to write Chicago papers as well. These formatting and citation styles are basically like guidelines that explain the way that your paper should be laid out and formatted, and also the way that you give credit to the sources that your information comes from. So the examples on this slide where it says like Smith 2018, page 21, those are examples of APA in-text citations. So when you have something like a quote or information that comes in from another source, you just want to include almost like these little tags that just hint at the fact that this information came from somewhere else with some brief information about the source. And then at the very end of your paper, that's where you put more of a full, complete list, including titles, where the work was published, if the source can be found online, a link to it, and you put all of that fuller information in a complete list at the end of the paper. So it's kind of a mix of those two things, so the small citations in text and then the longer citations at the end of the text. These sorts of things, as well as the types of sources that you're supposed to use, will usually be specified by your instructor either in the guidelines or during class. And as with other things, I would suggest always checking with your instructor if you're ever unsure whether you can use a certain source or not, or what type of citation style you should use. Always ask your instructor those questions. One final note on thesis statements, and this is more of a very particular difference I've noticed from high school thesis statements, is that there's this move away from generalizations and assumptions compared to high school writing. So what I mean by that is that not only are the arguments you're making things that you need to be able to directly support with sources, but your thesis statements have to be more specific in nature. From what I've seen of high school writing in recent years, the thesis statements that students are usually expected to produce amount to something like answering this type of question. So what happens in this book or this article, and what does it mean about the world? So there's this expectation that that final line of the introduction is almost like a true statement about the world we live in, like not quite a cliche like no good deed goes unpunished or something like that, but something generally observable in the world. In a college thesis statement, you won't want to do something like that. You'll want to be focused on much more specific ideas, like what is the author saying, how are they saying it, and why? Or in a case where, especially where you've gotten to choose the topic, what is it that your message as the writer is, and how do you know that you're right, or how are you going to prove that idea to us? So it's really a lot more focused on just the confines of those specific sources and those specific ideas you're working with. You don't take that extra step of generalizing it out to, things in the world happen this way. Like that step is not taken for college thesis statements, and most instructors will say, you're basically making an assumption about the whole world, and that's way too big of an idea to be able to be proven in a paper. So you don't want to take that step with your college thesis statements. And here I just have some examples of some different thesis statements in different disciplines. So the first thesis statement here, the purpose of this paper is to explore how the concept of stress influences the nursing profession, specifically with regard to burnout among new nurses. This is based on some first-year nursing papers that I've seen here at GPRC. One thing that's interesting to note here is the use of phrases like the purpose of this paper. Some instructors in some disciplines are totally cool with specifically and directly saying, I'm going to talk about this in this paper. Other disciplines, specifically English, I think are not at all happy to see phrases like that, and they prefer things to be, expressed in a more flowing, natural way without really drawing attention to the fact that you're writing an essay. So again, with phrases like that, just check with your instructors and check with the guidelines, check with the examples they've given you to see if that's the type of language they're looking to see in your thesis statement or not. So looking at this second one, although outsourcing does lead to short-term financial benefits for businesses, it has profoundly negative consequences for worldwide politics, economics, and human rights in the long term. So this is something I could easily see being written for a business communications class, maybe even for an English class where what you're reading are articles rather than novels. One cool thing that this one does that I often like to do, especially if I feel like my thesis statement is kind of boring or not really drawing the reader in, is it adds a counterpoint to the beginning where it starts with this although statement to say, although there are some benefits, I'm going to be talking about the drawbacks, and this is why the drawbacks are more important than the benefits. What this does is, by adding that counterpoint, you're showing that you're aware that alternative arguments exist out there, but you're kind of able to say, okay, I see and acknowledge those other viewpoints, but I'm going to go and talk about the evidence for the other side because that's the side I think is really important. And that makes it really seem like you've thoroughly considered the topic you're talking about and the different ways that can be discussed. Okay, so looking at this third thesis statement example, it says, schools' dependence on technology has caused students to lose the ability to think independently, leading to a greater prevalence of mood disorders, memory loss, and loneliness. This is something I could see being written for an education class, as well as those English classes that are largely focused on articles, because again, it's kind of taking a topic, potentially one that's been explored in class, and saying what effect that situation has on people or on that sphere. Okay, and the final thesis statement I want to look at is something more like what you would see for an English class where you're reading novels. And it goes, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird uses inner monologue, characterization, and dramatic irony in the wake of a tragic event to portray a world where ideas of justice and fairness are in conflict. So when you're writing a thesis statement about a novel, oftentimes you will be expected to include the author and the title in the thesis statement itself. You could probably also put it in the sentence just prior to the thesis statement if you really needed to save space. One way to think about it in comparison to high school writing is there's a certain type of sentence you're expected to put right before the thesis statement that kind of breaks down just what the text is that you read and the main message of it. That's almost closer to what you want for the college thesis statement than the sentence that is more of a generalization about the world. But anyway, going back to this English thesis statement, you may want to, or you may be using things in your thesis statement like literary devices. Sometimes you may be using specific characters in a novel as the different points of your thesis statement. One other thing to keep in mind here is typically whatever type of supporting point you use, if you're setting them up in your thesis statement, you want them to be the same type of thing. So in this thesis statement, for example, inner monologue, characterization, and dramatic irony, those are all different types of literary devices. If you were using characters, you'd want all three of them to just be character names. If you were using events in the book, you'd want all three to be events. Otherwise, it would just sound a little strange to say something like, To Kill a Mockingbird uses inner monologue and Atticus Finch to make its point. Like, it just sounds a little strange to have two totally different types of thing as the supporting points in your thesis statement. Okay, so with all that said, what are some things that we can do to get prepared for college writing to make sure that we have some tools that will be useful to us so that we can do all of these things and bridge any of those gaps that exist between college and high school writing? One thing I would definitely recommend doing, especially if you're getting a lot of feedback about needing to improve maybe your grammar and sentence structure and things on that level, is to customize the spell check that you use. This is more of an option when using Microsoft Word to write papers as opposed to Google Docs. I don't know if Google Docs has as many customization options as Microsoft Word does. I would recommend using Microsoft Word at least some point in the process, just so you're getting that really thorough spelling and grammar check in there. But yes, so to customize your spell check in Microsoft Word, you can go into File, and then near the very bottom of that File menu, there will be something that says Options. When you click on Options, I believe it's the third one down that will be labeled Proofing, and once you go into there, there will be a whole range of different settings that you can apply to your spell check. And that can be really handy, especially when you're getting into academic writing, because some of the things that it can help you check for include, for example, if your instructor doesn't want you to use I, me, we, you, personal pronouns like that in an essay, it's really easy for those to still sneak into your writing, and it can be hard to notice them because they're not really grammatically wrong. But you can set the spell check settings so that it will check for, first person pronouns, for example. So if you type I anywhere, it will underline it and you can reword the sentence to avoid using it. Another thing it can help you check for is contractions in writing. So instead of, truncating words like don't you can write out the full words "do not" instead. This is usually expected in academic writing, just so you have a bit more formal of a tone. So that's another thing that the word spell check can check for. If for some reason you don't have Microsoft Word or you don't have access to it, you do get Microsoft Office Suite by virtue of being a GPRC student. So if you need to have that set up, then you can always contact IT, or if you experience any issues with it, they can definitely help you out with that. Another tool that I found fairly recently that I find pretty helpful is a writing assignment calculator. I will link the one from the University of Minnesota, I believe, but if you just Google writing assignment calculator, there are lots of them from lots of different institutions. And what these do is they allow you to enter the start date and the end date of a type of assignment. So sometimes it'll have you check off whether it's a research paper, a lab report, whatever it is. And then when you put in that start and end date, it will generate sort of a list of the different steps you need to go through and when you should ideally have those finished by. So it might say something like, oh, for example, okay, if the start date is September 12th, let's say, then you want to have some idea of your topic by September 14th, and you want to have the beginnings of a thesis statement written by September 16th, and you want to find all your resources by September 20th. And it will give you a breakdown of the different steps that you can go through on that process so that you can space out your work and break it up into more manageable chunks so you're not sort of rushing to do it all at the last minute. Especially if you have to be finding and including sources yourself, you can get put in a very, very difficult position if you procrastinate, because if you need to find and read through sources, that can be a very labor-intensive process, especially if they're totally new sources that you've never read before. So you really want to leave yourself plenty of time, especially for that part of the process, because if you're just putting in sources at the last minute, it can become very scattered, and it can also become clear sometimes if you haven't really gone through the source that it might not really be supporting that idea that you want to put across. So yes, the writing assignment calculator is a huge help for that. Another website that's really helpful for formatting and citation advice, so like APA, MLA, Chicago that we were talking about before, a website that's great for that is the Purdue OWL website. Similarly, you can also Google this, or I will leave the link somewhere accessible near this video. But it has lots of different templates and examples of how to cite all different types of sources in those very commonly used styles. Another thing that they have on Purdue OWL is full sample papers written in those styles. So if you are one of those people where if you can see an example of something, then you can make your own work mirror that example. Those sample papers are a really, really great resource, especially if you're just starting to use formal citations and formatting styles for the first time. Those sample papers give you a really clear idea of how everything should be laid out, where all those different elements need to go, and how it should look when it's all put together and finalized. And the final resource that I wanted to mention is some of our online resources through GPRC. The link that I'm going to provide will bring you to our writing and grammar page on the Academic Success Center website. But if you scroll down, not only do we have, appointment bookings and our workshops in there, but we also have links to several different online handouts, as well as some LibGuides that discuss all different writing related things, from grammar and punctuation to those formatting and citation styles to the different expectations when writing different types of paper in college, different types of papers in college. And so if there's anything you're unclear about, or you get a new type of assignment and you're not really sure what to do with it, those would be the resources that I would recommend looking into for that. And with all that said, that brings us to the end of my presentation. If you have any other writing questions about the differences between college writing and high school writing, anything that you're unclear about, always feel free to reach out and ask. We are here to answer your questions and give you that support so that you can be successful in your writing ventures.